All right. Well, after that awesome and amazing sewing montage, behold the finished product. So here we go. Here is the items as I talked about in the previous overview video of how I envision them as they should be. So for both of these, I've done basically the same thing. So I'm just going to go over this one real quick because it was the first one I did and therefore the one with the most mistakes. Anyways, so basically what I did is I unstitched this side and bottom to pull open some clamshell out so I could get this flat so I could sew on it. As I posted in the community section, I think it was for that pouch or this one here, the interior of these wasn't like when they cut this material, they didn't, either burn the edge off after cutting it or use a hot knife to cut it. They apparently just cut it. Both the seam tape and the material itself on the inside were, after barely using this at all, I've just, inserted a magazine maybe a couple times. We're already fraying pretty badly. So I went ahead and burned it down and did what I could to restore the edge to not fraying anymore. And hopefully it will hold up. But I guess we'll see. I mean, at least it's better than it was. Then I sewed the tab on for the bungee retention. As you can see, this is the first one I did. Obviously, these ones are done a little bit better, even though I didn't quite get them straight. But fuck it, you know what? This is like the third time I've actually tried to sew anything, so deal with it. Anyways, this one I had a little bit of an issue where I kind of missed the bottom at the first try. Then I had to unstitch it and do it all over again. But after I got that straight, posted the picture up there, and I think more or less it did a pretty good job of it. Just got that sewed on there, so that's all ready for using the bungee with. I tried to, again, this first one being the one I made the most mistakes with, I didn't burn down the ends of the webbing enough. So what happened is as I was fucking around with it, sewing it, and then had to unstitch it and put it back on, it started to fray again. So I had to try and burn it down. But now that it's on it, I did end up burning the material as well. Luckily, I didn't burn through it, so it's still okay. But that was just me being a dumbass. As you can see on this one, it went much better, even though I didn't quite get them evenly. But at least I didn't have to try to reburn anything. And it didn't take me multiple tries to get those ones on, so that's something. So I sewed that on here, put it all back together. My intent was to, basically double stitch around the edges as well as the top here. As you can see, it's a little bit more than double stitched because I went the wrong way the first time around. So then I had to go back the other way to because I have I'm dealing with the sewing machine I have is from it's a Singer from the 1930s, so it stitches real good. It's nice and tight and real great at that. But it's pretty powerful too, and you can stab through some pretty thick sections of material with it. So it's great for sewing with, but it's old, and it only does a straight stitch in one line, which means every time you want to go back over it, if you want to double stitch something, you have to then stop, turn the thing around, and come back the other way. So that's what you've seen in the montage occasionally with me screwing around with turning things this way and that, is because it doesn't have a reverse on it. So occasionally here and there I got a little turned around with which direction I was going and then had to go back the other way to keep going in the direction I want to. So this ended up a little bit better stitched than I want it to be. It's now like quadruple stitched. Not that I got a problem with that. It'll probably, I'm sure I'll wear this elastic out now before it falls apart. But it's really well stitched now. Again, as you can see with this one, went much better the second time around. Everything is, I think I went ahead and triple stitched it. So this has 3 here, 3 here, 3 here, 3 here, and then 3 along the bottom. And then about the same for this. Each one, I went around each one of these about 3 times, which is probably total overkill, but I like overkill because overkill doesn't fail. So anyways, give me 1 second and I will show the finished product as mounted. Alright, and here's the finished product that you guys have all been waiting for from this ridiculously long video montage. Here's the single mag version mounted to this placard that I'll talk about at some point in the future someday. As you can see, it mounts up just fine still. It works just like it should have worked from the factory originally. I'm going to terrify YouTube with this normal capacity magazine. It sticks right in. Perfect. The sewing is now excellent. It's got a retention tab for either people who just desire retention for their faster magazines, because these things do have a little bit of a tendency to pop at the top, especially if they're sewn close at the bottom, or for when this stuff inevitably starts to lose its natural retention. Now you have something to hold it in there when you're running around. I went ahead and this is actually attached to the retention bungee. It's actually attached to the number 1 Molly attachment piece of webbing because the the webbing on this placard is insanely tight and really impossible to get anything in behind the webbing here once you have straps going through it. Some other pouches, like this one over here, are a little bit looser, and you can get, the bungee through it. But I found that with pouches like this that are very thin and flat, it's not conducive to run the bungee straight down, because you get a knot behind the pouch, and then when you're trying to stick the magazine in, it gets caught in the knot and it's difficult to insert. So it's better, in my opinion, to run that knot off to the side anyway. So running it underneath one of the Molly straps is kind of the way to go, like I've got it here. Also, if you're not running SNS pull tabs for all your pull tabs, you're wrong. And then over here, we have this other one here. You can see it's on a more... the reason I'm doing this one, this placard has plastic inserts, so that you don't have to use bungee. This is just a regular old bungee magazine shingle without any inserts from LBT. So you can get an idea for both of these. There you go. Like it should have been from the factory. Quick interrupt before I get started with other things here, or in the middle of other things, wherever this shows up. The other thing I forgot to mention before, when I was talking about taking these apart and what the inside of these things were like, the other thing that was very much worth mentioning was how easy it was to tear these things open once I got started. As soon as I popped that first stitch, I was pretty much able to take the things, pull on it, and just brat down the side. I had to pop a couple stitches, where it went through the webbing at the bottom here, but where there was no webbing, it just right across. Especially at the bottom here. The bottom, like I said, once I got that corner open, just really extremely easy to rip apart. Which, my point being, it was very easy to see at that point that not only was the stitching poor in that it was the stitches were at a wider spacing than the industry standard is for this type of gear, but it wasn't even very tight. Like I said before with some other gear reviews on the channel, you can get away with single stitching something if the stitching is nice and tight and at the proper, what is it, 6:1 or 8:1 per the stitches per inch or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. Anyways, if you've got the proper spacing and a nice tight stitch, you can get away with single stitching. But as easy as these things were to tear apart, it was further proof to me that what I was seeing was just not stitched correctly. And unfortunately, I'm an idiot and forgot to take video of that when I was getting it set up to sew. But you're just gonna have to take my word for it, I guess. but I've got a picture up on the community section of my channel where you can see the what I was talking about earlier about the fraying on the inside of the material and stuff. So I did document that at least. I forgot to take video of me taking them apart because I got so engrossed in the strangely fulfilling of stitching coming apart that I just, it's like popping bubble wrap, right? Once you get that first one going, it starts to just pop down, and you're just like, oh, let's do the next side. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's Maybelline. Anyways, I just want to also take a quick moment to mention that as well, and that, what I'm saying as far as like the stitching not being, up to the spec is very much evident, not only from looking at it, but once you try to take it apart, it's yeah, it comes apart pretty quick. And that part about the stitching is worth mentioning in my opinion, because this brings me back to, what I'm going to say at the end here, and that is I made a couple mistakes stitching these up. I totally fucked that up the first try around, and then on this one over here, I tried to come from the top down without realizing that doing that was stretching the material, so by the time I got to the bottom, it had pushed it completely off the bottom, and it was like at a weird angle and wasn't lining up anymore. So then I had to unstitch all that and start over again. And even with my old ass machine that, I have to like kind of hand crank sometimes because it slips. Even with my old ass machine that can only straight stitch, the stitches that I put in here were a hell of a lot harder to get out than the stitches that were in it from the professional factory that these came from. I mean, there's a there's a row of stitching at the top here that I didn't even try to take out. I just sewed over it because I had already had such a bitch of a time getting the stitching out on the side here that it just was like, I'm not going all the way. It took me probably a good 5 minutes or so to unstitch the single line of stitching I did here because I couldn't just and pop it apart. It was like pull one out. I was like, aha, it's not done yet. I haven't tacked it down, so it'll come out easily. No, it didn't. I had to go through and pretty much undo each individual loop and pull it out and do the next loop and pull it out. I couldn't just yank it apart like I did with these to start with when I first took them apart. And that's my crappy ass machine from the 1930s that can only straight stitch. Well, okay, that's not fair. It's not a crappy machine. It's actually a really good sewing machine, and it still does pull a nice straight stitch. But like, my point being, it's a very basic machine that was made a very long time ago and probably shouldn't be functioning still, but is. And the stitches I'm able to put in myself are better than a current day factory is able to do it, just because they won't. Witness me, Krydex. Why? And this is the point I want to make, the sort of end result of me bitching about this for a while. The end result I want to get to here is, I did this. This is mine now. I created this. I fixed this mediocre pouch myself. I am not a professional geared sewing guy. I have a very basic sewing machine that was, the height of technology back in the 1930s. I fixed this with a minimum of skill and a minimum of machinery. It is not only now correctly and well sewn around the edges, which, to make my point here, let's do what I did previously. Give it a good yank. You see that? Yeah. Nothing pulling away from the body of the pouch now. Witness, Krydex. Witness how simple it was for me to fix this. I did this myself. A minimal of technology. A minimal amount of redesigning. It took me a little time to do this because I suck at sewing and had to relearn how to use the machine and then try to figure out how to get this all to work together. But it could have been this way from the factory. The question I have is, why isn't it? I guess what I'm trying to say here at the end of all this is pretty simple. And that is basically my intent here is to throw down the gauntlet for all these gear manufacturers that are, mainly in the overseas ripoff clone category of things. Because what I just proved here is if my dumbass that can barely sew can get this done properly and turn a mediocre piece of gear into a effective and reasonably properly spec'd piece of gear, if I could do that, then they couldn't do it too. And the fact that they don't do it just proves that they're willfully not doing it. End of story. They could have done it, and they didn't. Which I think is funny because given the level of precision and attention to detail that these companies give to ripping off other companies' gear instead of creating their own, further, in my opinion, proves what I'm saying in that there's no sense for them to put that kind of effort into what they're doing and then completely just like, oh, we don't know how to sew and just whiff on that. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. Do better. I challenge the gear manufacturers because I'm just some idiot on the internet and I fixed the problem. It should have already been fixed from the factory. And if they could do that, like I've said, I'm going to beat this horse to death until until somebody does something about it. It should have already been fixed. It cost me a minimum of effort to do this. It can't possibly cost a a well-established company with the correct machinery much more effort than they're already putting into it to fix these very simple problems, to apply the correct tension and the correct spacing sequencing to their sewing, to sew it a little bit better than it already is. It doesn't cost but a few more seconds to double stitch something instead of single stitching it. And then, as I've pointed out before, if you're gonna just straight up rip off somebody else's designs, it costs you, again, literally nothing to make some extremely simple quality of life modifications like these tabs. So get with it already, guys. Alright, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this long-ass journey through my adventures in fixing these pouches and modifying them to fit how I envision them being used. And as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching. I feel like this is like the ultimate evolution of that meme, where the guy's like, I did this is mine now.